Hey, welcome back. I am Peter, co-founder of Podero Health. We work with ACOs and health plans to close care gaps at scale. And this episode is one I've been sitting on for a while. We are talking about late year retrieval, but not scheduling conversation. I don't want to talk about timelines and vendor assignments. I want to talk about what it actually costs you when your retrieval runs late, the downstream damage, the stuff nobody puts in a spreadsheet. That is the conversation for today. Let's get into it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Every health plan I've talked to has retrieval calendar. Dates blocked, vendors assigned, priorities ranked, and on paper, that looks good. That, looks like a solid plan. But here's the truth. Having a retrieval timeline and actually understanding the cost of missing it are two completely different things. So when I ask operators, what is the real cost if your late year retrieval runs 4 weeks behind? I get one of two answers, either silence or someone quotes me a chart per day rate. Which neither of those is right? The cost of late year retrieval isn't linear. It cascades. And it cascades across three different systems, across abstraction, member outreach, and submission. Most operators run those three systems in silos, and that is why the cost always stays hidden. Quick clarification before I get into it. When I say late year retrieval, I'm not talking about charts you missed entirely. I'm talking about charts retrieved in the final 8 to 10 weeks of the measurement year, where the operational window to do anything useful with them has effectively closed. Now, that is the scenario most health plans don't model, because charts arrives, so it looks like a win. Retrieval hits, but the window to act on what is inside is already gone. A retrieved chart is in a closed gap. It's a raw material. And a raw material that arrives too late to production doesn't become a finished product. It becomes a write-off. One more thing, and I want to say this directly, that NCQA is actively moving hybrid measures to ECDS only reporting, like lead screening, childhood immunizations, blood pressure screening, measures that have historically drove most of the late year chart retrieval volume. They are transitioning away from retrospective chart pool towards electronic clinical data system. That is real and it's underway. But here's what the transition actually means for operators right now. You are running two parallel models simultaneously. You have legacy hybrid measures that require chart retrieval. At the same time, you're also building ECDS capability for the measures transitioning out. So your quality team's capacity is split. Health plans who think the ECDS shift has reduced late year retrieval pressures are in most cases wrong. And here's why. These measures haven't transitioned. The measures that haven't transitioned, such as GSD, PPC, and others, are still generating the same operational crunch, with a smaller team paying close attention to them. So everything I'm about to describe applies to every health plan still running chart retrieval for hybrid measures, and that is every health plan listening to this. Now let's start with abstraction. So most operators don't account for this. Abstraction throughput is not static. It's a function of how many charts are in the queue, the complexity of those charts, and the time available before submission. Late year retrieval triggers a predictable failure mode in that you've been running a steady state abstraction all year. Your team of vendors has a rhythm. Then all of a sudden in weeks 45 through 52, a volume spikes hit. You're pulling charts that have been the hardest to retrieve all year, like, the specialist or the out of network providers, the practices with no EHRA integrations. These are by definition the most complex charts, and they all land all at once. So what happens to abstraction accuracy when coders are rushing high complexity charts under deadline? The abstraction accuracy will drop, not dramatically at first, but it drops. And here is what compounds it. The errors from late year abstraction don't show up until audit. So if a coder misses, a qualifying event in a chart from August, you have time to catch it. But if they miss it in a chart from November, you probably submit the error if there are no strong QA checks in place. So you eat it in your star score, or you catch it internally in year 2 and realize you've been systematically under counting a measure for 2 measurement years. I've also talked to plants who think they have a retrieval problem, and what they actually have is an abstraction accuracy problem that started with a retrieval timing problem. And the root cause is invisible because there are usually 3 to 4 months between late year retrieval when the downstream signal shows up. There's a secondary issue that doesn't get enough attention. When charts arrive late, the abstraction team prioritizes quantity over depth. So they code what is obvious, they skip the investigative work, cross-referencing member history, checking for related encounters that might support or contradict a code. That investigative layer is where a lot of gap closures actually happen. It is also the layer that disappears under time pressure. So late year retrieval doesn't just create risk on charts coming in late. It quietly degrades the quality of abstraction across your entire late year pipeline. Now let's talk about what happens to member outreach. Health plans typically run chart retrieval and member outreach as parallel tracks. And the assumption is retrieval covers members you can code retrospectively in some cases, whilst outreach covers members who needs to complete some type of service, right? But the problem is those two populations are not independent. So what you find in late year retrieval can directly change your outreach priority. Here is a concrete example. A member is flagged for a career gap, colorectal cancer screening, for instance. So they end up in your outreach active queue. Your team is calling the member, texting, and sending mailers, engaging the member. Then a chart from a GI specialist is retrieved in week 48, which shows a colonoscopy completion 9 months ago. Gap is closed in the system. That is good. But because the charts arrived in week 48, your team doesn't know that. So they end up spending weeks 42 through week 52 still trying to close the gap that has already been closed in the system. Now, this is not a data problem. This is an integration latency problem, and it costs you in 2 ways. One, you are burning outreach budget on members who don't need it. And secondly, those outreach hours are not spent on members who need it and who you can actually be able to close before the year ends. Now, let's flip it. A member who hasn't had a wellness visit in 2 years shows up in your late year retrieval pipeline, not from a retrieve chart, but because abstraction of a related encounter flagged the code diagnosis that triggered a new measure, right? That is a member that you want to contact now because they need a service before year end, and you maybe have 3 weeks to make it happen. But if retrieval is running late, right? If retrieval is running late, that member's abstraction happens after your abstraction team has already finalized their year end priority list. So that member doesn't get reached and the gap doesn't get closed. This is where the hidden cost really, really lives. Not just in the charts reviewed late, but also in members you didn't reach because your outreach sequencing depended on data that showed up too late to use. Most outreach programs runs on a calendar model, not on a data-driven model. They batch their outreach windows. They don't have infrastructure to continuously reprioritize based on real-time abstraction outputs. So when retrieval runs late, the outreach pipeline doesn't adapt. It just continues expensively, ineffectively, and your close rate in the final quarter drops. Now, submission. I want to be very specific here because when retrieval runs late, you end up in one of two places. Either you're rushing your primary submission with abstraction that hasn't had adequate validation time, or you are relying on supplemental data to catch what primary missed. Either way, your error surface increase. And here is what that actually costs you. So an NCQA certified auditor ends up reviewing your HIDIS production process independently. And if they find that your abstracted rates are unreliable, whether from sampling error, abstraction coding error, or inadequate documentation, whatever the case might be, they can assign a biased rate designation. That is not an internal warning. That is a formal audit finding. And when CMS sees a biased rate on a measure, they don't average it down. They set that measure to a 1 star. 1 star, regardless of your actual performance on ground, regardless of all the work you did. So all the efforts, the member outreach, the chart retrieval, all those activities become throwaway work, essentially. For an MA plan, a single measure landing at 1 star because of a submission quality problem doesn't just hurt that measure. Depending on your measure weighting, it can also pull your Part C summary rating below the quality threshold for quality bonus eligibility. So we are talking about the difference between receiving a quality bonus and not receiving one. For a plan with 50,000 members, that gap can be 8 figures. This is the actual financial exposure from late year retrieval, not a vague audit risk, a specific documented mechanism, bias rate designation with a specific financial consequence that every VP of quality in this space should model. The plans who understand this treat their internal abstraction not as a compliance date, but as a financial control. The validation window, right, which is the time between your last abstracted chart and your lockdown submission, needs to be long enough in a way that you are able to catch and correct errors before your auditor even sees it. Now, when retrieval runs late, what happened? That window compresses or it disappears. And here is what is frustrating about this. The biased rate mechanism is fully documented by CMS. It's in the star rating technical notes. It's not a surprise. So plans don't just reverse engineer their retrieval calendar from it. They build their retrieval calendar from habit, and then they discover the exposure when it's too late to even do anything about it. So let me leave you with the question worth asking in your next internal meeting. Not did we hit our retrieval target? That is a wrong metric. The right question to ask is, of the charts we retrieved in Q4, what percentage produced abstraction output that was usable in time to influence outreach, and in time to validate before submission. That is your late year retrieval yield. Sorry. And if you can't answer that, you don't have visibility into your actual HEDIS execution performance. You have a count of charts pulled. Those are not the same thing. Those are not the same. The plans that perform consistently tied to retrieval share one operational characteristics. They've connected retrieval, abstraction, and outreach on a single data loop with the cadence measured in days, not weeks. Not because they are more disciplined, because they have infrastructure that makes the integration automatic instead of manual. Every plan I've talked to knows retrieval and abstraction should be triggered. The ones who've actually fixed it didn't fix it by trying harder. They fixed it by eliminating the handoff latency between the system. What does that look like in practice? When a chart is retrieved and abstracted, that output needs to hit your outreach system within 48 hours, not at the next weekly sync between vendors. When abstraction flags a new gap, your outreach prioritization needs to update automatically, not when a coordinator manually recognizes two spreadsheets. And when your validation queue is building faster than your team can clear it, you need a system that surfaces that signal in real time. That is not a vendor management problem. That is an architecture problem. And the architecture problems don't get solved by asking your current vendor to communicate better. One more thing on the fix is the hardest one operationally. The plans who have generally solved late year retrieval pressure have moved 70 to 80% of their retrieval activity in Q2 and Q3. Hence the reason why I'm making this episode now, not in Q4. They use Q4 for confirmation, not collection. They require planning decisions made in January before the measurement year has real momentum. Here's where I will leave you. Late year retrieval isn't a vendor problem. It isn't purely a technology problem. It's a system thinking problem. And the financial exposure it creates is real, specific, and larger than most plans have on books. The biased rate mechanism I describe is not hypothetical. The outreach budget wasted on already closed gap is not hypothetical. The member who needed a visit in November and didn't get contacted because their chart was already in the retrieval queue, that is not hypothetical either. These are costs that don't show up in your retrieval report because your retrieval report only measures retrieval. If you want to understand what your actual late year yield looks like last cycle and what it costs you in stars and HEDIS and outreach efficiency, that is exactly the conversation Podero Health is built to have. We give plans a single execution layer across retrieval, abstraction, outreach, and submission. So the data latency driving these cascades doesn't exist. Come with your Q4 data. We will show you your yield number probably for the first time. The link for a demo or a pilot is in the show notes. And if this was useful, send it to whoever owns HEDIS operations at your plan. That is the conversation I want to be in. See you in the next one.
1, 2,